notice you have two Price family members here today, and I want to introduce to you Vincent's grandson, Jody Price. So stand on up, Jody. Jody and I were actually born in the same year. I want you guys to do the math on that one. My brother is 22 years older than I am, and my dad used to say it was the perfect example of Planned Parenthood. Get one kid through college and then have another one. So Jody actually lives here in New Jersey, and we don't get to see each other very much, but he's an amazing musician, and he does events all over the East Coast, so, you know, check him out. Do you have a Twitter feed or all that stuff?
Just a Facebook.
Okay, check him out on Facebook, Jody Price. And he's also the Jody Price of Simpsons fame. So that's very cool. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my dad. And the reason I come to horror conventions and talk about my dad is not, and don't go leaving the room and fleeing the building when I say this, I'm not particularly a horror fan. I'll explain why later in this hour. However, I am a fan of horror fans because, you know, it's you guys who have kept my dad's legacy alive. You guys have kept him in people's hearts, on people's minds, and I am so grateful to you guys for loving him as much as, frankly, I did. I love my dad so much, and that's why I come and do these talks. And I start with this picture because it kind of captures the dad I knew. This is us at an event at the Vincent Price Art Museum in East Los Angeles College. And if you guys ever get the opportunity to go there, it is unbelievably cool. And it really captures my dad. First of all, he always was wearing a rumpled shirt. And if you'll notice, he's got, I think this has one of those little pointer thingies, he's got plastic forks in his pocket because if there was any opportunity to get food, he didn't want to miss it. But I think you can see how much we loved each other. You know, about 3 years ago, my dad would have turned 100, and some organizers in St. Louis, and then it got taken up around the country and around the world, started this event called the VINCENTennial. And I thought to myself, okay, they want me to come out to the VINCENTennial, but what am I going to talk about? Yes, I wrote his biography. Yes, I know a lot about his career. But what is really important about my dad that would merit my going out and talking all around the world for a year? And what I realized was that my dad lived his life with so many things that we forget every day. He was a man who lived his life with this incredible generosity of spirit. People will tell you that they've never met anyone who disliked Vincent Price. That's true. I've never met anyone, even in his own business, who disliked Vincent Price. I was just reading something the other night where Christopher Lee said, Vincent Price is what the Irish would call a darling man. And he was. He always gave back. He wrote postcards to all of his fans. He supported artists in their work. He was incredibly generous in his spirit. But he also loved life himself. He lived life with joy. He famously said, a man who limits his interests limits his life. And so he walked through life being curious about everything. To my dad, boredom was like the 8th deadly sin. There was no excuse for boredom. And he said, if you are always curious, you will never be bored. And so what I discovered as I went around the world talking about my dad for his 100th birthday was that it reminded me how to live a more joyful, more generous, more passionate, more curious life. And you know, the other thing I inherited from both of my parents is that they were workaholics and I'm a workaholic. I work 18-hour days, 7 days a week. And I forget sometimes to live a life of curiosity and service and generosity and passion and joy. And so the reason I love coming to these conventions is to meet you guys, because you reflect back to me what my dad meant to you. And it reminds me, get out there, be curious. And so what I decided to do is, my dad wrote this famous cookbook with my mom. It's coming out, its 50th anniversary edition is coming out next year. And so I decided, I had a job in Atlanta, I'm doing something in New York, I was here, I decided to take a road trip around the country. A road trip of joy, and I'm blogging it on VincentPrice.com. But basically, I get to go and be like my dad. I kind of get to channel my dad and be interested in everything and meet people. And so I'm going to give this little talk today to remind you guys, I hope, to go out into the world. Because basically, you know, they say that horror is all about fear and being scared. But I feel like there are only two choices in the world. Fear or love. And actually, I think you guys are all here because you love this genre. You love horror. You love the actors and how they make you feel a part of this world. And I think, you know, we all could be reminded more often about how to live a life filled with love. So that's what this talk is about. I'm going to start with this little thing. It's a little tiny piece that a fan created for my dad, a little tribute for his 100th birthday. And it always makes me smile, so I'm going to start with it. Hopefully. Theoretically. Or not. Alright, let's try that. Okay, I won't be starting with that. Never mind. Okay, hopefully the rest of the audio works. So, I don't know what's going on. Okay, so my dad was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and I've been thinking a lot about his cooking heritage because of this cookbook 50th anniversary. But his grandfather was actually the first Vincent Price, who was a household name. He invented baking powder. He was the first person to patent extracts of vanilla and breakfast cereals, and he wrote cookbooks. And his youngest son was also named Vincent. People think it's a stage name, but it actually is a family name. And so he moved his company to St. Louis, and this is my grandfather, also Vincent Price. And he was somebody who was kind of an aspiring poet, actor, magician, and I include this picture because this is my grandfather, but this young man with whom he is doing this magic act is the father of another famous American actor, Orson Welles. So I always thought that was pretty cool that Vincent Price's dad and Orson Welles' dad were friends in high school. Is there something kind of going on? All right, I apologize. This is my dad's family, and he grew up feeling kind of like an outsider in his family. He was the youngest. He was the only one who was blonde. That's him. He was the only one who wasn't musically talented, and I know what that feels like. Jody is musically talented and seems to have skipped 2 generations. And so he found quickly that his passion was the visual arts. And it made him feel a little bit like he didn't belong in his own family. And I think that's part of what people see in his horror films. I'm sorry about this. I actually don't know what's happening here. Huh. I think it's not actually lined up like the... That's weird. Yeah, it's not supposed to be like that. I apologize. This is my dad when he was a young man. This is obviously going to be a little glitchy today, so I didn't check it out before I came. This is my dad as a young man in St. Louis. Like I said, his passion was the visual arts. And so he basically went to museums, he drew, he painted, and when he was 12 years old, he walked by this gallery. There were only 2 in St. Louis. And he saw this piece of art and he fell in love with it. And he walked into this gallery and he asked how much it was. And the gallery owner said $37.50. And it was a first state Rembrandt etching. And I bless this gallery owner to this day, who basically created a payment plan with my dad. And my dad used his allowance for 3 years to pay this $37.50 for the privilege of owning his first piece of art. And that really hooked him for life on the arts. I hesitate to see what's going to come up next. Nothing. This is my dad in his very first play. He loved the theater, but you know, he didn't have a lot of success in the theater. He didn't get cast in things. This is him playing Robin Hood in about 10th grade, but in high school, he never got cast in plays. He was always trying to sort of break into the high school plays, and nobody was particularly interested in having Vincent Price in a high school play. There's parts of Vincent Price that people don't know, and one of the things people always say, tell me something about your dad you don't know. So here's one thing you don't know, probably. One of his great passions was deep-sea fishing. He loved to go deep-sea fishing, and this is one of the earliest pictures I have of him deep-sea fishing. But he also loved to make home movies. So he was this ham actor to begin with. A lot of what you like in the campy roles in the Poe films, they took place when he was in his teens. And there were a lot of damsels in distress in these early movies. Really, I think all of the movies were an excuse to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. It happened a lot. This is a still from one of his own movies, coming out of the surf wrapped in seaweed. And here's another blank slide. I have no idea what's going on, but I love this picture. It's of my dad. He graduated from high school in 1929, and right before he graduated from high school, he saved enough money to go to Europe by himself. And there's a wonderful site on the web put together by a fan named Peter Fuller out of London. And it basically is, you should check it out, it's my dad's entire journal of his first trip to Europe when he was 17 years old. And he went all over seeing the great works of art. And that really remained his passion for his life. Like his father and uncle and brother before him, he went to Yale and he studied art history and theater. And in his last semester at Yale, he made a great friend, a very famous man named James Thurber, the great American humorist and cartoonist. And James Thurber was this incredibly famous person who befriended a 22-year-old guy. And my dad thought, this is the most famous person I've ever met. I'm going to tell him my big secret. And his big secret was that he wanted to become an actor. And James Thurber laughed at him. So my dad decided not to become an actor, and he would go on and study art history. Now there's a little footnote to that. In the 1940s, James Thurber wrote this wonderful piece for The New Yorker, and it was about giving advice to young people. And in it he said, young people are always asking me for advice, but ever since I told Vincent Price not to become an actor, I don't give him advice anymore. My dad, as I said, wanted to study art history. So he went to the very prestigious Courtauld Institute at the University of London. And he studied the school of Albrecht Dürer. And the reason that's important, other than the fact that it was my dad's passion, is because Dürer was a German artist. And so he went to Germany, he learned German, but he was still bitten by the theater bug. And he saw John Gielgud's Hamlet 8 times. And finally, a friend said, you know, you're so into the theater, why don't you try out for a play? So he did. He tried out for a play at a private theater club. It was a play called Chicago, an American play. And my dad always said that he got the part because he could walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think, you know, there's something to be said for that because not a lot of people were chewing gum in England, and he played this sort of gum-chewing cop. Well, the next play at this theater club was called Victoria Regina. And it was about Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. And my dad bore this uncanny resemblance to Prince Albert. He was tall, he was thin, he was blonde, and my dad spoke German. So he tried out for the play, and he got it. And to really get into the role, he actually translated all of his lines from English into German so he would think like Prince Albert thought. This play was a huge success, and my dad became Male Newcomer of the Year in London and got all these awards for acting. The female newcomer of the same year was Vivian Lee, so that's pretty cool. And so the play was bought by an American producer for his great American star, Helen Hayes. And the playwright, whose name was Lawrence Houseman, refused to sell the play unless the producer took my dad with him. So that's how my dad came to New York. And that would have been a great picture to show you, but I can't. I apologize. That's my dad in this play. So he goes to New York and he becomes a matinee idol. He is the biggest star on Broadway, opposite Helen Hayes, and Hollywood comes calling. Hollywood comes calling, offering him, in the middle of the Depression, in 1935, $1 million movie contract. Now, my dad was a smart guy, but he was also always a humble guy. And so he went to Helen Hayes and he asked her advice. She was the first lady of the American theater, one of the greatest actresses. He wanted to know what she thought. And she said to him, "Do you think you know your craft?" And to his credit, my dad really thought about it. He said, "Well, how could I? I've really only been in one play." She said, "Exactly. If I were you, I would turn down that $1 million movie contract and take the time to learn your craft." And so he did. That's what he did. He went basically all over the Northeast Coast every summer. He would do about 5 or 6 plays in summer stock, because in those days Broadway closed because there was no air conditioning in the summer. And so he learned his craft by being in a ton of plays. And that's what I hope I'm going to show you now. This is him, maybe, with the great Anna May Wong, who was one of the great Asian actresses. And this is him with the great Lorette Taylor, another very famous American actress. And as I said, he went all over learning his craft. And then when Hollywood came calling again, he was ready. He was signed to a contract by Universal Pictures. But there was a problem. They wanted him to be a leading man. Now the thing is, he didn't really want to be a leading man. He saw himself as a character actor. The actors he admired were Edward G. Robinson and James Cagney and Spencer Tracy. But I mean, look at him. He didn't look like Edward G. Robinson. He was stunningly handsome. So Hollywood didn't really know what to do with him, and they cast him in his first role in Service Deluxe, where he played sort of a comic role. And he really hated it. He loved Hollywood, he loved being a part of all of that, but he wanted to play character roles. So he decided to go back to Broadway to see if he could play some character roles. And he went and joined Orson Welles' Mercury Theater. Now Orson Welles, you guys all know who he was, but the Mercury Theater was really cool because they were doing classic plays in sort of cutting-edge modern productions. And he got to really, hone his craft some more. This is actually his contract for the Mercury Theater. He used to play 4 parts. Orson Welles was kind of a difficult guy to work with, but I don't think my dad was noticing very much because he fell in love with a fellow actress in the troupe, Jody's grandmother, Edith Barrett, who was a big star in her own right. And she lied about her age. She was about 7 or 9 years older than he was, but he didn't know that at the time, and they got married and were quite the glamour couple. That's them on Fifth Avenue in New York, getting married. And I don't know what that was supposed to be. And then he goes back to Hollywood and he starts taking more character roles. So this is him in The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex with Betty Davis and Errol Flynn. And there's kind of a funny story about this. He'd already played Errol Flynn's part in Summer Stock when he was learning his craft. And Errol Flynn was quite the playboy and rarely showed up, and certainly rarely showed up prepared. And so the director would constantly threaten Errol Flynn with firing him. He said, Vincent Price already knows your lines anyway. It's a good thing my dad was such a nice guy. He also did his first horror film, which was Tower of London. With Basil Rathbone and Boris Karloff, both men would become dear friends for life. And as a little sort of side note, Barbara O'Neill was in it, and Barbara O'Neill was his girlfriend in elementary school, the first love of his life. She also became an actress. And what he remembers most about that is that Boris and Basil felt that they should initiate him into Hollywood. So there's a scene where they're going to drown his character in a vat of Malmsey. And knowing this, in this vat, they dumped every piece of crap, old food, old bottles, cigarette butts for a week. leading up to it. And then when they put him in the vat, they held him down just a little bit too long. So there always was a little horror in Boris and Basil. And that's my dad in that role. But you know, on the whole, they kind of had a hard time knowing what to do with him. This is him playing Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon religion. And you know, the only thing really that has any ties to his horror films is I think this is the first movie he made, and one of many, in which he was burned to death. People are always burning in Vincent Price films, it seems to me. Now, theoretically, I have a clip for you, we'll see, but this is a film he was in called Green Hell. It's a James Whale picture, and I'm sure some of you are James Whale fans, but this was a very bad James Whale picture. In fact, it is widely regarded as one of the worst movies ever made. And my dad was quite proud to be in one of the worst movies ever made. And before YouTube came along, when my book came out, I would go around and tell people about Green Hell, and I would read a review from the New York Times, which is hilarious. But now I show a clip from YouTube, which in theory should work, but if it doesn't, I apologize. You know, I think I upgraded my software and it's made it glitchy, but we're gonna cross our fingers. Theoretically.
Say, Richardson, 130. Boy, it's hot. I'm roasting.
In the swamps, it gets as high as 140.
I thought the neighborhood was a man till after he was dead.
That's why they call it the Green Hell.
Strange guy, Richardson. He always keeps to himself. You know anything about him?
Nothing. I'm not listening to know about any man to dead.
As it is, don't look now, but there's something moving over there.
Alligator shoes look hungry.
Well, don't fall insects. You might poison them. That'll be tragic.
This is my favorite part.
How mysterious the jungle is at night.
The more you see of it, the less you know about it.
Sounds incredibly lonely, doesn't it? I wonder why there's so many lonely people in such a crowded world. Brad, do you think a man can love two women at the same time, in his heart be faithful to each, and yet want to be free?
What do you want, an answer or a justification?
And there we go again. Every scene is, has that lovely little tribal transition in it. He was very grateful to be killed off early. My dad was a fan of Hollywood, and you know, I think that's why he was always so great with his fans, because he started out being a fan. He wrote fan letters and always was thrilled that he got a response back. And this is him with Jodie's grandma.